assistant professor at the University of Florida, and I've been working with Howard Bishop Middle School this year. And we're going to present to you the work that we've been doing today. One of the PhD students in our program, Amy Murphy, has been working tirelessly on this project with us. She's also been working tirelessly on her dissertation, and when you're working tirelessly and more tirelessly, you get very tired. And so Amy is sick this morning, so she's not able to join us, unfortunately. So Mike and I and Lewis Rhodes, a teacher at Howard Bishop, will be presenting our work today. So let me start with a brief introduction. Like I said, I'm Brianna, and I'm a former middle school teacher. I taught for the Los Angeles Unified School District for 7 years. I taught 6th grade language arts and social studies and English as a second language. And then I went on to teach alternative education to kids who'd been expelled from the district, which is where my real heart and passion lies, with kids who challenge us to rethink our systems. And so that's how I got into the work that I'm doing now, which I'll talk more with you about a little later on.
And I'm Mike Gamble. If you can't hear or it's too loud, give me a little high sign somewhere in the back. We're working on this. Well, then we're going to be sharing, but we'll try. Okay, I'll take your suggestion. I know most of the folks in this room, but I'm Mike Gamble, and I'm in my 5th year as principal at Howard Bishop Middle School. I'm a Gainesville native. Grew up here, as I always say, for better or for worse, my entire formal education has been right here in Alachua County. I like to think for the better. As a kid, I hated middle school, went to Fort Clark. Where's Karen Clark? She was talking about how many nice store-bought clothes that she could have to wear to school. I went to middle school in shirts and shorts that my mother sewed. Lived through that. Where's Karen? Never thought I'd be a middle school educator. Had my sights set on high school and started teaching at Fort Clark Middle School. Never looked back. I loved it. Surprised by the intellect of the kids and the challenge of the students, and just went from there. I worked at Fort Clark, came here to open Kanapaha in 1996. I'm a former Navy guy. In the Navy, you're called a plank owner if you start with a brand new ship or a squadron or something like that, as did my lovely wife Dallas and Diana Chance, and I'm not sure if there's any other plank owners. Diana's a media specialist here now, but Diana and I were on the same team for several years, and it became I crossed over to the dark side as an assistant principal at Westwood and was there for 5 years. And then Don Lewis brought me over to Lincoln, was there for 5 years. And I've loved every place I've been at, and then had the honor of being named principal at Howard Bishop. So that's where I'm at now, and turn it over to our next guy.
And I'm Lewis Rhodes. I'm a technology instructor at Howard Bishop in the Magnet program. And I'm also the team leader for our 6th grade academy team, and I'm on the steering committee. So I'm going to represent kind of the faculty interest in this process.
Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Nice try.
Okay. Got it. All right. So let me orient you a little bit to what I care about and why I came to University of Florida and how I got involved in this work, and then we'll launch into what we've been working on and why we've chosen to work on it that way and where we are now. Okay? So, like I said, I spent half of my career as a teacher teaching kids who'd been expelled from school. And what I learned about that is there's a whole lot of things that we can do as teachers to support them that we often don't think about doing. So I really started to think a lot about classroom management and things that teachers could do to support all kids, particularly the kids that were most challenging to them. What we see happening a lot of the time is that those kids get removed from class. And a report just came out that showed that actually Florida has the highest percentage of out-of-school suspensions in the country. Is that good? So in Florida, 20% of secondary kids are suspended from school. That's 1 in 5. And in Alachua County, the most recent data that we have from 2011 to 2012 is 26%. So in this county, it's actually higher than the Florida average, which is higher than any other state in the United States. When we break it down by race, we see drastically different statistics about the kids who are pushed out of school. And what we know from research is that given the same types of behaviors from a white student and a black student, a teacher will actually respond differently. So a lot of times when people say, well, certain groups of kids, they just don't act as well. But we know that there's actually a level of teacher bias that's involved as well when we think about the kinds of consequences that kids get. So in this county, 1 in 3 of your black kids was suspended from school, from secondary school, in 2011, 2012. And only 1 in 10 of your white students. So to me, that's a social justice issue. Why are these gaps so large? And why are we removing so many kids from class? Especially in a context where we have to get them to achieve. Because if they're not in class, they can't learn. They can't experience the academic press, they can't experience the social supports, and they become more disengaged from school. And so that's kind of my orientation. My research is about classroom management and school discipline. And this work that we have started at Howard Bishop began because I was doing research here in the district looking at some of the practices, and that's actually how Mike and I met and started talking about some of these issues. And this is where you have to hear more of me than I would like because Amy's not here, so I apologize for that. So let me start by talking about what we started to do at Howard Bishop. We actually started with working with teachers and focusing on classroom practice with issues that they identified themselves regarding classroom management. So teachers identified something they wanted to work on, and we used a format with them called teacher inquiry. Teacher inquiry, if you haven't heard of it, is a kind of structured way for teachers to study their own practice. It's the kind of professional development that we advocate at UF in the School of Teaching and Learning, and it was what we wanted to do at Howard Bishop to help teachers change practice. What we know from traditional professional development, right, the sit and get, is you might get a few key strategies, and if they make sense to your context and you know how to do them and you have the support necessary to do them, you might go and do them. But most of the time what happens is people aren't able to successfully transfer those practices over to their classrooms because they don't have the supports that they need. They don't have the practice. They don't have collaborative peers to help them. And so we wanted to really take an approach that was classroom embedded, teachers identifying something they wanted to work on themselves that was important to them, and then working with them in their classrooms several times a week, doing some coaching, collecting some data, looking at our evidence, and trying to see if we could make some change that was sustained because now the teacher had had actual practice in that classroom with those kids. In thinking about how we ask the teachers to frame the kinds of problems to look at, because, you know, I'll be honest with you, if somebody had said, I really need to work on how to better teach volcanoes, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not the person for you, right? So I had to help them to think about something that was a challenge for them that was also something that I could help them with. And so the way we framed it was, we wanted them to think about these 3 components of classroom practice. And this will resonate with what Paul was talking about earlier. So in my own research and in reading other people's research, what I found is there are kind of 3 components to classroom practice. And if they're not all in place at really mastery level with teachers, then your most struggling kids are the ones who are not going to make it. Some kids do okay if you just have one of these areas down really well and the others are not so strong. But your most struggling kids depend on all 3 of these to be in place, and that is positive relationships with you, academic press or relevant curriculum and instruction, and tight classroom management. And I've seen classrooms where the teachers' activities were fantastic, but the kids who struggled couldn't engage because there was not management to support that. Or there was management that was tight, instruction that was good, but the kids didn't like the teacher because they didn't have that relationship, they didn't have that rapport. So we wanted teachers to think about one of these areas, one piece, one sliver, that they could focus on in their classrooms. And so we did that. We did that for 2 semesters. We worked with 6 people. And we found that there were some limitations on what we were able to accomplish because those teachers weren't in an environment that was supporting their learning maximally. And I'm going to talk more about what I mean by that. But that led us to start to have conversations about, okay, how do we help these teachers really be able to focus on teacher learning in a school context that's going to really support it? So let me just give you an example of what I mean. One teacher had a student who really challenged her, really challenged the whole team, really challenged the whole school. And he had one foot out the door, okay? And And she had thrown up her hands and said, I've tried everything. And this is, a really committed teacher, really well known for her practice. And she said, I want to do an inquiry on figuring out how to support this child. But she met a tremendous amount of resistance in trying to shift the way that she was trying to work with the child. And so we couldn't help her push her inquiry forward because the feedback she was getting from colleagues was, we don't know how to support that. We can't support that, right? And so we had to think, well, that's an interesting response. Let's look at what we can do school-wide to support it. Okay?
In their work with these 6 teachers, Amy and Brianna took a much more detailed look at our discipline numbers. And sure, we would always look at those as administration, as our student support team, staff, with the idea of we want to see a downward trend in number of referrals written and number of kids being suspended. And over the last few years, this has been a positive downward trend. That sounds funny, but yes, we did see a decline. However, in their closer look at it, what they found was that 2 years ago, just to break it down quickly from the bar graphs, and this is the glaring number, 2 years ago, 23% of our kids missed 10 or more days of classroom due to disciplinary consequences. That's a combination of in-school detention and out-of-school suspension. And even that number is probably a little bit low because that doesn't account for time spent in timeout, time just where the kids are sent to the dean's office and parked there for 1 or more periods. So think about that. You got almost a quarter of your school's population missing 2 weeks of instruction. Is it any wonder you got a huge number of kids that come into middle school already below grade level and they're not showing progress or not passing class? So that was just a huge wake-up call, and then the question was, all right, where do we go from there? And we had a lot of conversations back and forth. And my whole philosophy was, I want to bring about change, obviously, but something that's permanent and sustainable. It shouldn't just be about me. In other words, I don't want something that says, okay, as principal, I should be able to say, hey, stop writing so many referrals to the deans. Stop suspending kids, all right? Why is this kid suspended for 5 days? Well, that's because it's what it says in the Code of Conduct handbook, and this kid's been in the dean's office 8 times this year. He should get a 5-day suspension. Yes, I can say that, and then something happens to me, and boom, it all snaps back to reset, and keep doing the same old again, and lead to these kind of numbers. So in our conversations, I said, want to do something that's more sustainable and is going to lead to a permanent change for good, which helped us down the road to our process there. I'm sorry, I can't quite read our notes here. So where we went and kept bouncing ideas back and forth, and I was all about trying to find another tool for teachers to use, and I was using them for ideas about, what's something we can give the teachers to help them out? What's some literature? You're in academia, and I know up on the literature much more than I am, even though I'm an input kind of guy and like to read lots of different articles, and here this might help, here this might help. But we needed something deeper than that. We tried those things on a small scale, and we needed something that would be a little deeper and far-reaching across the whole faculty. Which leads us to, back to you.
Okay, Dawn promised that, can you go back one? Sorry. Dawn promised that this was not going to be a PhD class, and it's not, but I have to present a model to you. And I'm going to convince you that the model is important, I hope. I started thinking about what made sense in terms of moving forward, and what we had done was not as effective as I had hoped. And so I had to step back and say, why? Why wasn't it as effective as we hoped? And it was because our theory of change was wrong. So that's a fancy way of saying what we were implementing wasn't going to get us to where we wanted to go because something was missing from our way of thinking. Something was missing from our model. So what was missing? So that's what I had to think about. And we do this all the time in education, and that's why theories of change are so important. Paul talked about the pendulum swing, right? Is it phonics or the whole language? Is it basic skills? Is it inquiry, right? Is it middle school model? Is it traditional test prep? I would argue that those changes happen because we do what Michael Fullen, who is a scholar of education reform, accuses us of doing, which is we take an approach of ready, fire, aim, right? We put something in motion without thinking about where we're headed, and when it doesn't work, then we step back and go, wait, where are we headed again? Oh, wait, let's do something else. And we don't really clarify, what are we trying to do? Is it going to get us where we're going to go, where we want to go? And do we have the supports necessary to make that happen? And we did not. We did not have the supports necessary to pull off those teacher inquiries as effectively as we wanted. So we had to step back and think, well, what are those supports? The supports that we needed to have in place, I would argue all schools need to have in place to support teacher learning. And I'm calling them the conditions, structures, and processes to support teacher learning, or the content, right? So let me talk about each of those, and then as I'm introducing you the idea, Mike's going to tell you what we've done this year at Howard Bishop to put these things in place to support teacher learning. So conditions are the context in which people function in an organization. So in schools, your context is your school culture, the ways that people informally interact with each other, the expectations you have of each other about how you do your jobs, right? The communication that happens. Those are the conditions in which you work. So we knew we had to think about the conditions as part of our work together. Go ahead.
Go back. Good conditions. So through the course of the last school year, really picking up steam in the spring last year, meeting with the student services team again, that's the guidance counselors, the deans, and the administration, we started taking a look at some of the literature and developing a shared language and looking at the problems that we face as a school and especially how it relates to discipline. We threw out wonky terms such as distal and proximal problems and deficit thinking, and that's all part of our shared language. Not going to go into that now. But this allowed us to look at issues and think about ways we might solve them. From those, starting with the student services team, and with Amy and Brianna's impetus, we were able to come up with a summer leadership conference for 3 days. We met at the Thomas Center in July with our team leaders, department chairs. We had a total of 18 people, and it was good buy-in. There were a lot of good things that came out of that. Probably one of the best things we did was, and again, just working on a collaborative structure where people have input. We set up frameworks for our meetings and how they should run, and about how everyone should have a voice, and watching airtime, making sure that one voice doesn't dominate a meeting, and put these into practice. A lot of it was just team-building things that Amy and Brianna came with and shared with us that helped quite a bit. As a result of that, we came up with a school-wide duty schedule that was a result, as I said, the workshop, and took that back to the school, and it's the duty schedule that was fair. Of course, not everybody's happy with it, but it is fair, and that's what we've been running with the school year, and it's been going very well. Also, in the spring, at faculty meetings, we solicited faculty opinion on what support looked like, what support from administration. Because we know, we say, well, what do teachers need to feel to be supported? And especially in terms of discipline, it's like, well, help me out, take this kid out of my class. That's not what we were all about, but it was important to hear these things. And again, Amy and Brianna did a lot of work in sorting this and looking at it and putting them into different categories that we can study. We also, the last point there about the Leadership Summit comes actually before the last one, and giving faculty more say-so in solving problems. And for an example, at the start of this school year, we had a lot more students, thanks to some crappy charter schools on the east side of Gainesville closing down because they weren't educating the kids that weren't successful in the traditional middle schools. So our enrollment was up quite a bit to start this year, more than we were allocated for by like 50 kids. So we had to add sections. Originally, the administration felt the best way to approach this was to reshuffle some sections, give a couple teachers different preps, and hire another teacher. And we were given the unit from the district to hire another teacher. The teacher says, when we presented this to some of the teachers that would be effective, they said, we would rather keep a single prep and take on an additional class and teach 6 periods a day. We listened to them because we wanted to keep our initiative going here, and that's what we wound up with for our major program teachers, each social studies and science teacher wound up with an extra section. Not something I like to do, but again, it was a faculty input, and that's what they all preferred to a teacher, and that's the schedule we wound up with this year.
So that's how we started focusing on conditions or school culture type issues and communication and collaboration and trust. And then we had to think about school structures. So structures are the systems that organize the way people work. So in a school, the structures that organize your work are like the school schedule, the time that you have set aside for professional development, the ways that you structure homeroom, things like that. Those are the structures that you experience in your school. So we had to think about whether there were structures in place also to support our work.
The biggest challenge in finding time to do things, the biggest challenge is finding time. So what we did, we consolidated meetings. We are working on our initiative with really only adding one extra meeting a month, and that's an additional faculty meeting. Instead of professional learning communities, questions to manage, we call it communities of practice, where we have teachers come together and not just to discuss, okay, what's the field trip, what kids are giving us a hard time, when's the next fire drill, that kind of thing. Looking at activities to collaborate on to problem solve. And we do this with our student support meetings, we do this with our team meetings. Grade level teams traditionally meet once a week, so we asked that we dedicated 2 of those meetings a month, so every other week, to problem solving, community of practice. We added one faculty meeting. We always had one monthly traditional faculty meeting, pass out some information, have a nice breakfast in the PTA. But then we added another one where we're doing activities and again lead to collaboration and problem solving. That's probably my minute, so I always want to say something else. I'll try to stay on schedule.
So those were the structures that we put in place. We had to allocate the time. Mike talked about communities of practice. Communities of practice describe the process in which a meeting runs. So the processes that we needed to have in place were things that describe the ways that people work. Processes are the ways you work. So if a meeting is hierarchical, meaning one person talks and makes an announcement and everyone else listens and then goes away, that's a process. That's a way that meeting works. So we had to think about, are the processes that we're using, the ways that we're structuring those meetings, is it conducive to the kind of collaboration and culture and support that we want to have in place? Remember, this is all with the thinking that we wanted to start to promote conversations that are focused on teaching and learning to support the teacher learning that we wanted to do in the classroom. So here's how we focused on processes.
One was, as it says there, converting hierarchical to collaborative meeting structures. The typical, even Dr. George talked about the PIC council and team meetings. As I said, I've worked in 5 middle schools here in town, and they all seem to be run mostly the same. You get the team leaders in there, okay, here's the information. I thought I was squared away if I had a typed and written out agenda ahead of time. But again, it was sort of the same thing. Okay, we're passing down information. Okay, we've got a decision to make about something. Here, team leaders, take this back to your team, discuss it, bring it back to us. But it really wasn't around the table, everybody giving equal input and people listening to each other, and really not so much a problem-solving thing. It was mostly just passing down information. Sometimes information's coming back to us, and team leaders are seen more as just conduits and not really key pieces of the leadership team to collaborate to, again, solve problems and look to really improve student learning. So that's the big thing we have with that. And again, the help that Brianna and Amy provided us were supplying protocols to run these meetings. I wasn't familiar with these, and it's these National School Reform Faculty. It's a nice workbook. It's got some great stuff in there. And again, many of them are simple team building stuff that you've probably done in your classroom with your students before. But guess what? They work with adults as well and really help us set up and build the trust and get these things working, because you can't just bring a group of people into a room and say, okay, here's a big problem we got to solve, let's get down to it. No, you got to take little steps first, and let's do a fun activity and see how things work out, build on that, and that's what we did with them. We made time for ourselves by revising our agendas. Yes, with our Howard Bishop, we call the team meeting or the pick, or called steering meetings. It happened before I got there, so I wasn't going to change that. So we still call them steering meetings. And again, it used to be kind of top down, put out the information. Again, if I had a typed agenda for everybody, felt like we were doing a great job. But again, it was just very much passing down information. So there's still important information that everybody needs to know about. We still do that, but we condense it more. We try to get that out to people ahead of the meeting, a day ahead of the meeting, and go through that, and then spend the bulk of our time working on problem solving. If there's an issue like that, let's discuss it. It's not always clean, it can be messy, sometimes we go around in circles a lot, but this is the kind of thing that leads to sustainable, permanent change.
So those were the kinds of school-wide supports that we were focused on, to try to get people talking to each other, using common language, thinking about ways to support kids, and having structures in place to make those conversations happen in an ongoing way. The thinking behind that, like I mentioned at the beginning, is once those things are in place, we can get back to where we started, which was teacher inquiry and having a context that would support the kind of learning that teachers could do. So when we think about that content, that teacher inquiry, what's being focused on, that can actually change. We have a support structure in place now where if you want to take up the implementation of Common Core or how to make your lessons more culturally relevant, there's a structure in place to do that. The content can change, the structure's in place. The content didn't work at first because the structure wasn't in place. And so that's why we stepped back and took this approach of, okay, let's think about how to develop school-wide some common language, some common culture, some time to support next steps. So Mike's going to talk about the content that we started with. We actually started with some content as a school as well.
Gotcha. Time, 1 minute. As I said, I kept hitting on Brianna about, well, what's some literature we can use and something that we can bring the faculty together with the study. And what we settled on was this text here, Effort and Excellence in Urban Classrooms. See, it's not a very thick book. It's not wonky, it's not academic, it's not just filled with theory. What this book is, it's a case study of several schools in the Midwest with urban populations, in other words, populations similar to what we have in East Gainesville. And case study of schools that were successful with these kids. And as I said in the past, I'm always interested in giving teachers tools, something they can use in the classroom to help improve their instruction. Well, this book's underlying message is it's not about the tools, it's the attitude the teacher brings. It's the attitude the school brings, and what we call an it's my job approach, in which you have to take the attitude of it's my job to make these kids successful in my classroom. It's not the guidance counselors putting the kids on a track sheet. It's not, oh, the administrators aren't in the hallway, the kids are rowdy. It's these kids are in my classroom. It's my job to help them succeed. What can I do to do that? And it's not letting traditional problems get in the way. I've only got 1 minute, so can't go into a lot of those examples. But again, it's all about the attitude of taking that job. And for us as administrators, what's it mean to be an It's My Job administrators in order to support teachers? As a dean, what's an It's My Job approach? As a guidance counselor, what's an It's My Job approach take? So that is the underlying message of this book. And through our meetings, we've been going through this book chapter by chapter. Very in-depth, detailed, focused around structure. So it's not just, okay, read chapter 4, come back next week and tell us what you thought about chapter 4. With Amy and Brianna's help, we've had much more structure about what these chapters mean and how they relate to us.
Okay, so now you get to hear about what it's really been like.
I appreciate it. So I got a few minutes to talk about, from a teacher's perspective, what has it been like with the collaborative leadership model? And one of the biggest things was, I was thinking this morning as I was getting ready to come here, I remember our summer leadership summit and the energy that we left after a week. To that, sorry. I'll just connect to here or something. The energy that we left with after a week of preparation, a week of learning about these things that Brianna and Mike have talked about, and how we were going to come into a brand new school year and promote positive change. It was really refreshing because I remember all of the teachers and leaders who participated in the summit, we were ready to go back and to be disciples or prophets of this new way of thinking. And I'll be honest, when they say that's where the rubber meets the road. And when we came back and we brought some new things to our faculty, everything is not always going to be smooth. It's not going to be, oh yeah, let's do it. We met some opposition. One great example was as Mr. Gamble said, we did put together a new duty schedule. And I remember my own colleagues going, what is this new duty schedule? But we got a chance to explain to them that it was through the work of a collaborative process. It wasn't one person trying to be the smartest person in the room. It was everyone coming together and giving their input and saying, these are the things that we need to have as a part of how we tackle the problem of duty. There's plenty of new vocabulary that we have all adopted and we use, like communities of practice. One of my favorites are the community agreements that we have whenever we have meetings, whenever we come together in meetings. And community agreements are just basically, what are the rules of engagement? How are we going to engage each other? We have a couple of sayings like, quit taking it personal, Q-tip. Another one is, help me out, guys. Watch your airtime. Yeah, that's one. Have fun. Thank you. Oh yeah, speak your truth. Speak your truth, which is one that sometimes can get a little messy. But when people are feeling that there's an environment of trust, and I can say what really I am feeling and not hold it back, now it's out there. We get to deal with it. We have new strategies because of this process to take on problems. Another undertaking that I really feel like was a victory for our faculty and students was this year we also created a brand new club experience for our kids. So in the past, we'd always allowed a few teachers who had a planning time to create a club, and a few students, not the entire school, would be able to participate in clubs that the teachers would provide as enrichment clubs. Now our entire faculty came together, and we now have a school-wide club day where every student had the opportunity to participate in a club or be a part of a study hall during this time that is supposed to be for students and teachers to connect and build positive relationships. So basically what as a faculty, our experience that's come from this process has been largely positive and still growing. Our school culture is starting to shift. And that was what I think everyone who left from the Summer Leadership Institute, or whatever we call it, our Summer Leadership Summit, wanted to see is our culture, the way that we believe about our school, begin to change, because anything that we perceive as a problem on our campus now is in the hands of the teachers to do something about it. And I think that's been one of the most empowering things.
Okay, so here's where we think we're headed. Wait, don't go away, Lewis.
Okay.
Remember this, we're doing one by one. So you do the first one.
Okay, we're still data-driven instruction. We're still looking at the numbers, looking at referral rates and the amount of time kids are spent out. Failure rates, that's a biggie too. And if you got to see the op-ed piece we had, it was in last Sunday's paper, we're on a positive trend with that as well. It remains to be seen. Again, those numbers were from a little over half a year, but we've big improvement from previous years, and hopefully that trend will hold. And hopefully what we want to see is increased academic success, right? A much reduced failure rate, kids doing better on the standardized tests, on our assessments that we give them.
Another area that we're headed into, or continuation, is we feel like there's a strong need for remediation for students who are not succeeding. And so we as a faculty are currently, we're like in the middle of it right now, as we speak, working on a solution, a school-wide solution for how are we going to, it's my job, make sure that every student on our campus is successful. And so students who need remediation, we're currently working on a structure that will allow students to be in environments where they will find that success. In addition to that, we know that a large population of our school does not need remediation. So we're trying to basically balance that out by while students are receiving remediation, we want those students to also receive enrichment at the same time. So what we're trying to do is work out a enrichment and remediation structure.
So in my mind, thinking about enrichment and remediation and data-driven instruction, that's the next bit of content, if you think back to the model, that I imagine we're going to take up, right? So now we have structures in place, people have time to communicate, they are oriented towards student success, and now we need to figure out how to help more kids be more successful. So that, I think, is the next bit of content that I imagine that we'll take up. And again, I imagine that to need to occur in a job-embedded professional development model. So, meaning on the ground, in schools, in classrooms, with you as you do your work. That's what I imagine us to continue to do. And now we've got some structures in place to do it, and some trust and some openness to do it as well. I also imagine continuing to develop the relationship between the university and the school district, which I'm very excited about. I think we're at a place of growth right now. Which is pretty exciting to me. I teach pre-service teachers, and then they all come to you to continue their training, and some of them get hired by you. Like Holly was in my class last fall. She works at Howard Bishop now, and I would love to continue to tighten those connections, because I think with tighter connections we can better support our kids, and that's really what we're about. So I'm hoping that laying the groundwork that we talked about today will help us to continue to grow in those ways. And we have some supports and some challenges for making that happen. So we're going to talk about supports and challenges at each of the levels that impact our work. Lewis.
So you have the first one?
Yes, the first one. Then you, and the rest.
Okay, so we know that at our school we have some supports that will help us in making these changes. We know that more collaborative relationships are being made. Since the beginning of the year, we had teachers who never really collaborated, and now we're collaborating all across the school, and that's a really powerful thing for our school that has 2 programs, but we have to have a one school vision. The second thing is that we have school-wide structures that are in place. The way that we operate our meetings, for example, would be examples of those school-wide structures. And as I mentioned before, the school culture is very much improving. The morale is improving. The way that we interact with each other is improving. And most importantly, we have a vision of making sure that kids come first. And what we're doing when we put things into motion are behind that belief of putting kids first and their success.
Any challenge? Hear that? Okay, we still got some challenges too. I'd love to be able to stand here and say we got everybody on board, but that's just not the case. For those of you who don't know, at Howard Bishop 2, we've got a magnet program, major program. It's hard to bring everybody together. What we've done with our structures here, we have brought people together for the COPs, where we combine the academy teachers and the major program teachers for these meetings and activities. But as I said, not everybody's on board. As we said, the underlying theme of our book study has been its individual attitudes. Not the easiest thing in the world to change. I've been in the team meetings just the other week where teachers look me in the face and say, I'm not getting a thing out of this book. This book is a waste of time. And guess who's leading the league in writing referrals as a 20-year teacher veteran? This is coming from teachers that have classes with over 50% of a class receiving a semester F. Yeah, you'd think they'd be a little more open to, okay, maybe I should look at my practices, but they're not, okay? They've been doing the same thing for a long time, and why should they change? again, this is where the numbers come in. And a big challenge is initiative overload. We started this on our own. This is before Dr. Roberts got hired. We started this process. This is before we got told, hey, this is a grant you need to write. Hey, this is something else. So I'm spending a lot more time in school. I go home a lot later now, and I'm thinking, oh, you know, I'm a fifth year principal. I should kind of have this down. It shouldn't take so much time. But it's a lot of work. So initiative overload is a big challenge. And as I said, I'm all about making it sustainable. It's something I want to have carry on at the school. It shouldn't depend on Mike Gamble being the principal there. I want permanent change for the good of all our kids.
So we've had some support at the district level as well, and it's been primarily in the form of flexibility. When Mike and I started talking about potentially making some changes, like he just shared, Dan Boyd was still the superintendent, and even with the superintendent change, we've had a lot of flexibility to be able to move this initiative forward, and so that's been especially helpful. There have been some challenges at that level as well. We are looking at potentially losing an assistant principal, as some of you may know, and that's going to be incredibly difficult. So Mike talked about initiative overload. People are extremely, as you all well know, running all day, every minute, all the time, just trying to keep their heads above water. And so that makes it difficult to change. Change takes a tremendous amount of energy for anybody about anything, right? And there's less and less of that to go around, and that's a definite challenge. And then I think another challenge that exists is that, I know Mike didn't share this, but I know that this process has been a journey for him as well and for his assistant principals, and I think that it would be extremely powerful to think about how to build some of those same supports, context, structures, and processes in place at the district level for administrator learning so that they can talk to each other about some of the work that they're doing, thinking about restructuring meetings so that people are sharing what they're doing and have some support around some of those issues. So we also have support at the university level. We've had some access to some funding, which has allowed us to do this work. We talked about the Leadership Summit, and the School of Teaching and Learning has generously allowed us to have access to some funding that was set aside by Kathy Shuey's father-in-law, right? That has helped move this work forward. We've been able to pay teachers stipends to work during the summer to think about some of these issues, to read a book. Who wants to read a book during the summer, right? To actually supply those books for them, and to provide some support for Amy, who's not here today, and some support for me to release some teaching time to be able to do some work at Howard Bishop as well. So that has been extremely helpful and I think necessary to move this work forward. And so that's, I think, something that the university has done for us. I think that a challenge that we continue to face that the university could think more about is how we could collaborate with each other at the university to think about how to reduce maybe some of the potential overload with all of the initiatives that we're involved in, how to make things more cohesive. We also could benefit from thinking about our context structures and processes and how we talk to each other and how we interact with schools to make sure we're on the same page and able to be as effective as possible, and that one project is complementing another project rather than demanding more of schools who don't have maybe the time or the resources to sort all that out. However, as you look at this list of supports, the list is long and the work has definitely gotten off the ground, and we've seen some great first successes, and so I'm excited about what's to come. You guys want to add anything?
Nope, because Kathy's giving us a high sign. Kathy has a question like, when can you stop?
Yeah.